YouTube is not merely a media platform. It is arguably the most powerful instrument of mass audiovisual influence ever created. It reaches across borders, classes, age groups, and political systems with a scale and immediacy that no television network, film studio, newspaper chain, or government broadcaster in history has ever possessed. Because of this, YouTube now occupies a role that is not only commercial but civilizational. It shapes mood, attention, memory, language, aspiration, anxiety, and cultural rhythm on a planetary scale. The central argument of this thesis is that YouTube should consciously embrace a higher cultural function by making one major film free to watch each day, chosen for its relevance to the current condition of humanity. The deeper justification for this proposal lies in the immense power of synchronized mass viewing. If 300 million people were watching the same film on the same day, the psychological and cultural effect would be profound. It would not merely be entertainment. It would be an event in collective consciousness. Imagine one film presented in everyone's viewing feed on the same day. Modern society has become fragmented into countless algorithmic microrealities. Each person receives different news, different recommendations, different emotional triggers, and different symbolic reference points. This has weakened one of the most important features of healthy culture: the existence of common experiences large enough to give society a shared imaginative vocabulary. In previous decades, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, blockbuster films often served exactly this purpose. When a major film arrived, millions of people saw it within a narrow time window. They discussed it at school, at work, at dinner, on television, on radio, and in public life. The film became more than content. It became a temporary cultural center of gravity. It shaped jokes, fashion, language, identity, aspiration, and public feeling. It created a kind of collective consciousness. This collective consciousness was not mystical in the vague sense. It was concrete and socially observable. When large populations absorbed the same story at roughly the same time, they developed overlapping emotional and symbolic frameworks. That overlap mattered. It created common mental territory. It allowed society to think together, or at least to feel together even when people disagreed. A blockbuster era produced shared reference points that helped bind culture. In contrast, the present media environment often produces isolation disguised as abundance. People consume endlessly, yet rarely converge. They watch different things at different times under different algorithmic pressures, and thus inhabit increasingly separate psychological worlds. This is why the proposal for a daily free YouTube film is so important. It is not just about access to cinema. It is about reintroducing synchronization into mass culture. If YouTube selected one film per day and made it freely available, framed as the world's featured film for the next 24 hours, it could recreate a version of the shared cultural event that once emerged through blockbuster cinema. But unlike the old blockbuster model, this would not depend solely on marketing budgets or theatrical release structures. It could be organized intentionally around relevance. A film such as Elysium, for example, could be chosen during a period of intense discussion about inequality, borders, healthcare access, elite detachment, and technological privilege. The result would be that hundreds of millions of people would not only watch the same film, they would watch the same film because it speaks to the same historical moment. That distinction is crucial. A shared film event on YouTube would not merely generate audience concentration. It would generate a synchronized interpretation of reality. This is where the concept of collective consciousness becomes especially powerful. Human beings are social creatures whose perception of the world is heavily influenced by what they believe others are seeing, feeling, and discussing. When 300 million people encounter the same narrative on the same day, each individual viewer is no longer simply watching a film in isolation. They are participating in a global act of attention. The awareness that millions of others are absorbing the same symbols, the same emotional arc, the same dilemmas, and the same imagery creates a sense of being mentally linked to a larger whole. This can amplify reflection, discussion, emotional resonance, and historical awareness. In earlier decades, blockbuster films often played this role unintentionally. A film became a major shared experience because the theatrical system, marketing machinery, and slower media environment concentrated public attention. Films became generational landmarks. They gave people common myths. The importance of that phenomenon cannot be overstated. It helped produce social coherence. People from different backgrounds could still refer to the same scenes, themes, and emotions. There was a felt sense that society had watched something together. This mattered culturally because culture is not just a pile of individual preferences. It is also the pattern of what large groups hold in common. The decline of such common viewing has produced subtle but serious consequences. Society has become more personalized but less unified, more abundant but less coherent, more connected technologically but less synchronized psychologically. The result is that public discourse often lacks common symbolic anchors. Even major events are interpreted through fragmented feeds rather than shared cultural narratives. A daily free film chosen by YouTube could help repair this by creating a recurring public ritual of convergence. The phrase, "Tonight the world is watching this," would once again mean something. The significance of 300 million simultaneous or near-simultaneous viewers would be extraordinary. That number is larger than the population of many major nations. It represents not just reach, but the creation of a temporary global audience with a common focus. From the standpoint of media theory, this would amount to a manufactured moment of planetary-scale symbolic alignment. From the standpoint of psychology, it would create an intensified awareness of participation in a social whole. From the standpoint of culture, it would help restore the public event as a meaningful category. And from the standpoint of philosophy, it would represent one of the few remaining ways in which a fragmented civilization might periodically remember itself as a civilization. The effect on consciousness would likely unfold on several levels. First, there is the direct narrative effect of the film itself. Its themes, emotions, conflicts, and imagery shaping thought. Second, there is the social effect of shared awareness. People knowing that others are seeing what they are seeing. Third, there is the discursive effect, the explosion of conversation that follows. The film becomes not just an object of consumption, but the subject of collective processing. People debate it, reinterpret it, meme it, resist it, praise it, and compare it to reality. In doing so, they participate in a wider act of societal self-reflection. That process is one of the building blocks of collective consciousness. One of the tragedies of the present era is that humanity has an unprecedented technological ability to gather attention, yet rarely uses that ability for meaningful shared reflection. Attention is harvested continuously, but usually fragmented, monetized, and dispersed. The idea proposed here would reverse that logic, at least temporarily. Instead of dispersing attention into millions of unrelated clips, the platform would focus it. Instead of surrendering entirely to algorithmic individualization, it would deliberately create one zone of cultural unity. Instead of treating viewers only as consumers, it would treat them as members of the public. This proposal also revives the importance of the event itself. In the streaming era, everything is available but very little feels urgent. Endless choice has paradoxically weakened cultural significance. When everything can be watched at any time, nothing carries the force of now. The blockbuster era had the advantage of temporal concentration. A film mattered because it arrived as an event. A daily YouTube film initiative could restore this condition. The film would not simply exist in the archive. It would be the selected experience of the day. That temporal framing would help generate seriousness, anticipation, and participation. The social benefits could be considerable. Families could watch together. Schools could discuss the film. Workplaces could talk about it the next morning. Commentators, educators, and creators could build analysis around it. Different nations could respond from different angles. Younger viewers could be exposed to important films they would otherwise never choose. Older viewers could rediscover works in a new context. Cinema would once again become part of shared public life instead of merely individualized private consumption. The idea also has a democratic quality. A daily free film would allow people who cannot afford multiple subscriptions to participate in a major cultural experience. In that sense, it would not only create shared consciousness but shared access. This is especially important in a world where inequality increasingly determines who has access to high-quality cultural goods. Making one film per day available to all would be a symbolic act of cultural inclusion. It would say that some experiences are too important to remain locked entirely behind paywalls. Of course, questions would arise about who chooses the film and according to what principles. But this is a manageable challenge, not a fatal objection. Transparent editorial standards could be developed. Selection panels could rotate. Public input could be incorporated. The choices could reflect global diversity, thematic relevance, artistic merit, and historical significance. The aim would not be ideological control. The aim would be meaningful curation. Every society already lives under conditions of constant hidden curation through algorithms and commercial incentives. This proposal simply asks that one small part of that curation become explicit, thoughtful, and oriented toward public value. The example of Elysium illustrates the proposal well because it is a film whose themes intersect so strongly with present anxieties. It dramatizes a society split between extreme privilege and excluded masses, with healthcare, technology, and physical separation reinforcing hierarchy. Whether one agrees with its politics or not, it clearly touches the nerve endings of the current age. If hundreds of millions watched such a film together during a time of intense housing stress, healthcare inequality, or elite withdrawal from public responsibility, the film could become a mirror through which society contemplates itself. That is not a small thing. It is one of the highest functions art can perform. The broader implication is that YouTube, because of its scale, is uniquely positioned to become not just a delivery system for content but a curator of shared human moments. It can create a daily ritual of convergence. It can restore a form of collective attention that has been weakened by the algorithmic age. It can help society once again experience culture as something held in common. The blockbuster era of the 1980s and 1990s demonstrated that shared cinematic experiences matter. They were important culturally because they gave millions of people the same symbolic material at the same time. They shaped conversation, identity, humor, and worldview. In today's fractured environment, the need for such shared moments is arguably even greater. The difference is that now only a platform with YouTube's scale and accessibility could produce them deliberately on a global level. Therefore, this thesis concludes that a daily free film initiative on YouTube would not merely be an act of generosity or a novel feature. It would be an intervention into the structure of modern consciousness. If 300 million people watched the same film on the same day, the effect would ripple through conversation, memory, imagination, and social feeling. It would strengthen collective consciousness by restoring a rare and precious thing. A common experience large enough to remind humanity that despite all fragmentation, it still has the capacity to look in the same direction at once.